Hello everyone, Ember Power here, and welcome back to a new video. In this one I'm going to be taking a look at United Wings, which is a budget deck that came around in the set Paldea Evolved. So United Wings is this pretty solid budget deck, I would say, that's based around the idea that you're trying to get as many of these Pokemon into the discard pile as possible. And this is admittedly a bit easier to do, but honestly, I just kind of at the start of this video, I know this intro has been a bit of a mess already, but I kind of just want to talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly for United Wings, because there is definitely some highs and some lows with this deck as well that I think are definitely worth, mentioning, bringing up, and going over. So the good is naturally that this deck is pretty cheap to build. It's also really fun. Of course, when you're trying to get a lot of Pokemon to the discard pile, it's pretty fun, especially decks like, Mad Party and Night March that we've seen in the past, and even Lost March, which is forgotten sometimes. These decks are very fun to play, and that's always something I can commend them for. This also pretty easy to play because United Wings on Murkrow costs a single Dark Energy, so it doesn't require special energy. Of course, Wattrel and the Flamigo do need two colors, so we have to use double turbo. But still, needing double turbo for just two of those attackers, and then for Ditto, who can copy Murkrow's attack anyway, we just need to use basic Dark Energy. So that's pretty cool. And basically, the only other really, really good thing I can think about off the top of my head for this deck is probably that Murkrow hits weakness on Mew and Gardevoir. Gardevoir is super popular on the ladder right now, so that kind of, ties in quite nicely with that. We also have Wattrel, which will hit weakness on Lugia and anything else in the future that's really competitive. Like if we ever get a Rayquaza EX or something that's weak to lightning, then, Wattrel's obviously pretty strong for that. But if you do, of course, attack with Ditto and copy Murkrow, then of course you won't be hitting that weakness. So, of course, do bear that in mind. But still, hitting Lightning and Dark-type weakness is pretty strong, honestly, and one of the more appealing aspects of this deck, for sure. Now, unfortunately, we have to talk about the bad points of this deck. The bad points being, of course, 20 damage times the number of Pokemon in your discard pile really isn't the modifier that it used to be. Now, looking back to Night March, I should say, that was when, EX Pokemon had around 108 HP, and like the highest HP in the format was like 240 or something from a Mega Evolution. So times have definitely changed with this deck, and, even if you get all the birds in the discard pile, you're still a fair way off from ever getting a one-hit KO on a V-Star or an EX Pokemon. So you do have to rely on 2-hit KOs. And of course, if something goes pretty wrong, i.e. you miss an attack, you miss a bird or something, you prize an energy that you really need, or for example, you don't get enough damage to do a 2-hit KO at some point in the game, then that's going to be a bit of a problem because 2 prize EXs and V-Stars are very efficient, and if you're not even 2-hit KOing a V-Star, you have a bad turn or something, then you're going to be in a lot of trouble. On top of this, decks like Lugia can also have single prize attackers in the form of Archeops. You can have the Fusion Strike. If they're playing the Fusion Strike build, they can have access to Meloetta, but typically they'll just be attacking with Mew, so that's still pretty decent. But, stuff like Gardevoir can use single prize Pokemon, like the, forget the name of the balloon. It's been a while since I've seen that card, actually, but the Drifloon, I think it's called. Yeah, Drifloon. There's also, of course, single prize Gardevoir, and it is a bit difficult for them to consistently chain attackers compared to you. But if something does go wrong and you have to attack them with a Wattrel or something, things can get pretty awkward, so do bear that in mind. So, of course, this deck does have one more glaring weakness. That weakness being Night... No, I said Lost March there. I was like, wait, what? Definitely not Lost March. The main weakness is Lost Zone. So, of course, Lost Zone, very efficient deck in standard format. Of course, if we base everything around Lost Zone, then there's no real point to playing any other deck other than Lost Box, effectively. But of course, this deck is bullied by Sableye quite a bit because of the low HP. Now, unfortunately, or fortunately I should say, we can do stuff like Kirlia 8 HP and evolve it up into Gallade, which has 160, which is pretty decent. But, the deck still kind of struggles a bit. We do have a Flamigo, which has 110 hit points, which admittedly is pretty high for these kind of decks to have. But still, 110 isn't that much of an upgrade. And if I'm being brutally honest, I would much rather this guy just had 90 HP and we could find it with a level ball, because otherwise 110 is just kind of awkward to find. You have to use stuff like Nest Ball, and we'd probably want to use the Insta-Flock ability anyway from our hand onto the bench to find 3 other Flamigos. So yeah, honestly, not the best deck in the world, but not the worst deck either. In the games that I've played with this deck, it's kind of easy to see what its positive matchups are. You of course want to be playing against stuff like PAL, which is super popular. Stuff like Gardevoir can be pretty decent. The Mew, the double turbo build, is pretty good. Stuff like Lugia, I would say, is average. I would say Lugia is surprisingly average because even though you do have the Wattrel, they have Archeops and they have Dunsparce to turn off weakness most of the time. So I feel that's a bit of a problem for this deck. But still, Lugia, not always the worst matchup, especially if they think, they don't take your deck seriously and you think you're just playing something stupid, then, Lugia can be pretty good, but, kind of just depends on the player, I guess, at that point. But yeah, just that's it for Pokemon. We're of course using the Kirlia line for refinement, just allowing you to discard a card, draw 2 cards, and then the Gallade can find a supporter card. This is kind of like insurance against Iono, basically. We also have Squawkabilly for the very first turn of the game. I don't know if you can read that Squawk and Size ability, or Squawk and Seize rather. But if you don't know what it does, basically it says on the first turn of your game, you can use that ability and discard your hand and draw 6. And it's not when you put it from your hand onto the bench, which is pretty solid, so you can use this in conjunction with stuff like Research or your own supporter like Serena. So that's pretty strong. We also have a Ditto, as mentioned earlier, can copy Wattrel and Murkrow, as well as Flamigo, but we typically want this to just copy Murkrow because, it's a single energy. We also have Manaphy, because we kind of need Manaphy to block out Radiant Greninja against Pal. Initially, if you're just like playing Manaphy to deal with Greninja in Lost Zone, I would say just don't bother really, because Lost Zone, in my opinion, is just no loss for this deck anyway. So yeah, this is mainly here for Radiant Greninja in Pal. If Pal dips in play for whatever reason, I could see myself just removing Manaphy, honestly. But yeah, that's about it for the Pokemon. Flamigo, mentioned earlier, a bit bulkier than the others, which is nice. And Insta-Flock is, of course, a decent ability, but United Wings, still 20 times modifier, and if we have to use double turbo, of course, that's a minus 20 damage, so we don't want to be doing that. So yeah, fairly weak on the Pokemon front. But we have a look at the trainers, and we've got 4 Ultra Ball to find our Pokemon, 4 Level Ball to find the other Pokemon that are smaller, 2 Nest Ball to, well, that's mainly to get like Squawkabilly and stuff in the first turns. We've got 2 Hisuian Heavy Ball, 2 Super Rod, 1 Pal Pad, 2 Escape Rope to switch around, 2 Rescue Carrier to retrieve Pokemon. We also have 2 Boss's Orders, 1 Collapsed Stadium, which is super interesting. I probably should have mentioned this earlier in the video, but this deck is actually a 17th place finishing Flamigo deck. I will leave a link in the description. Hopefully I'll remember to do that. If I don't, let me know. But basically, this list finished 17th in a limitless event. And one of the most interesting tech cards, I think, was the Collapsed Stadium, because it kind of disrupts stuff like Lost Zone, but it also removes stuff like Squawkabilly from your own bench, which I think is pretty cool. So definitely like the inclusion of Collapsed Stadium. For Research, because we do need to be discarding our hand to draw 7. We also have 2 Serena, which I do approve of because, it's just helping you discard Pokemon as well as giving you additional gust effects. We also have 1 Beach Court. Honestly, I was tempted to remove Beach Court in favor of something like a Town, just to help get set up a bit, because I feel Beach Court helps a lot of decks in Standard right now, whereas Town only helps the decks that really want to focus on single prizers. So might cut Beach Court yet, but not too sure about that, I guess. Got 4 Dark Energy and 4 Double Turbo. I might try and experiment with Luminous Energy and Radiant Charizard, to be honest, because yeah, Murkrow is solid, but the problem with this deck, as I mentioned earlier and throughout the video really, is that your damage output is pretty weak in comparison to, past iterations of his deck. Even though weakness is a big thing, you can still KO stuff like Pal, you can still get stuff like Lugia, you can get Mew, you can get Gardevoir, which is all very nice, but still the deck kind of lacks the real power, I guess, that, something like Radiant Charizard, I guess, could offer. Now, we're not even playing a Radiant Pokemon. You could play stuff like Radiant Jirachi, I guess, but you still have to flip a bunch of coins. So I'll probably try out the Luminous build of the deck. If I ever do any gameplay for Bird Brain, I think it'll probably be a Luminous Charizard deck. But yeah, that's kind of it for this deck, really. Speed and Power, and let me know what you think about this deck down below. And yeah, thank you for watching.